well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. I've had a couple of folks ask, where's Mario? Haven't heard from him all week. He's around. I can see him out there in the front yard right now, scratching and pecking away. So he may show up on the porch rail at some point before the end of the program. He may not. But you know what? I don't mind the silence from Mario. Actually, I kind of prefer it that way. We do, however, have a great conversation in store. Larry Keane, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, sitting down with me today to talk about a number of topics, including the Supreme Court's sidestepping of Snope. And Justice Brett Kavanaugh said, well, you know, maybe in the next term or two, we'll take up a case dealing with a hardware ban. I also want to get Larry's thoughts on cities' move to get rid of its discriminatory policy for those in the firearms industry, requiring them to put in place standards that go above and beyond federal law, right? Not selling firearms to adults under the age of 21. Not selling, quote, large capacity magazines, things of that nature. These provisions were put in place 7 years ago, right? After the shootings at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, city announcing that they are going away on Tuesday afternoon. So we'll talk with Larry about that. And we're going to start the conversation. National Shooting Sports Foundation has not weighed in officially on the proposed merger between the ATF and the DEA until now. But Larry did share his thoughts and the organization's thoughts on that proposed merger here on Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. We'll start there. Take a look and a listen. Larry, thanks so much for coming on the program. It's good to see you, sir.
It's always good to be with you, Cam, and I just want to point out the standings in the AL East.
We're going to be talking about a lot of things, but the AL East is not one of those things today. Congratulations to your Yankees. 10 games up over the Red Sox. It's early yet, Larry. That's all I'm going to say. It's early.
It is.
Yeah, wipe that grin off your face.
Come off the bus right now.
All right. Well, now that you got that out of your system, listen, there are a lot of topics I want to talk with you about today. And let's start with something that just dropped a couple of days ago, this proposed merger of the ATF and the DEA. I'm curious what your thoughts are personally and what the NSSF thinks of this idea.
Well, first, the idea of merging ATF in with another federal law enforcement entity is not a new idea. This has been around, frankly, for decades. There's been talk about merging it with the U.S. Marshal Service, with Secret Service, with FBI, with Homeland Security. Now we hear about DEA. The industry has always been opposed to the notion of disbanding or merging ATF. We don't think that's in the best interest of gun owners, and we don't think it's in the best interest of the industry. So we do not support the merger at all. Now, there are some out there calling for ATF to be completely disbanded, but I would just remind my friends that make that argument that, the Gun Control Act doesn't go away. The National Firearms Act doesn't go away. Maybe reconciliation changes it, but it doesn't go away. The laws on imports don't go away. So, you can't. Someone has to enforce those laws. Mm-hmm. And I would rather, the devil and have a relationship with. Now, do we think that everything is fine at ATF, particularly under the last administration? Absolutely not. We have said publicly that ATF needs good, strong, new leadership, and it needs to course correct, that it has to stop its attack on the firearms industry. We're not the enemy. It has to stop its attack on the Second Amendment. There's lots of changes that need to take place at ATF, course correction, strong leadership. But we see evidence of that taking place now with, particularly Deputy Director Rob Cicada is, I think, doing a very good job the new chief counsel, Rob Leiter, doing a really good job. We're seeing changes like, most obviously, doing away with the zero tolerance policy, and that is being refined and reworked, allowing FFLs who had their licenses revoked over ticky-tacky paperwork errors are going to be allowed to apply to get their license back. So that's encouraging, and other things that are going on within the organization. So we do think we're seeing good leadership with the acting director, Dan Driscoll, and with the new leadership at ATF, getting them course corrected, getting them refocused on their core mission of, being a law enforcement agency that goes after bad guys, that's not attacking Second Amendment rights. And we need to make sure that once we get it corrected, that it never slips back to what was going on under the Dettelbach era under Biden. And so there's legislation to do that. For example, Senator Ernst just introduced her bill yesterday at a dealership in Iowa that's a member of ours. And so we need to make sure that we don't ever backslide. And that's through legislation. But disbanding ATF is not a good idea. DEA is much larger than ATF. Mm-hmm. So just imagine whatever you call the entity, the Violent Crime Bureau, or whatever name you come up with.
Right.
You now have essentially ATF on steroids, supersized. What happens under an anti-gun administration the next time around? Now you have this behemoth that can be wielded against the industry, against gun owners. And we don't think that's advisable. We think there needs to be course correction. We need legislation to make sure we don't backslide. But we do not want to see ATF done away with, because if you merge it into DEA, the DEA culture will take over. Mm-hmm. We have no relationship with DEA for obvious reasons. And frankly, we don't like the association with the lawful commerce and protected right, the Second Amendment, being associated with drug dealing and drug cartels. We used to say about merging with the FBI that, if you did that, then the FBI would be looking for a terrorist in every gun store. We don't want a DEA looking for, cartel members in every gun store. So we think you need to fix ATF, but it should remain an independent agency. It provides customer service, if you will, to the industry, which is critically important to allow the industry to operate under the law and provide, goods and services to our customers, gun owners all across America.
So to piggyback on that, so this is a proposal, right? I mean, this is not set in stone. You've also got, in the meantime, President Trump has proposed his budget for all of these federal agencies. The ATF getting a pretty sizable cut to its budget. Again, you talk about, the big bad entity that it would be if the DEA and the ATF merged in this, sort of supersized, weaponized agency, or at least an agency that could be weaponized. What do you think about the proposed budget for the ATF as its own entity, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're working with right now.
Right. So we do have concerns. We've expressed those concerns to the appropriations subcommittees. I'm not surprised, and I think it's probably appropriate, given what went on the last 4 years, that there be an adjustment to their budget. But we're concerned that this cuts too deep, too close to the bone, that ATF will be forced to shutter NFA, shutter firearms ammunition technology, so we couldn't get determinations, classifications. Then it would, wait times for NFA forms will go back up. That we won't be able to get import permits in a timely fashion. We won't be able to get licenses renewed or new licenses issued if you cut that deep, because ATF has to stay, as it should, focused on its primary mission, which is fighting violent crime. So we're concerned that it goes a little too deep. I think some reduction is appropriate. I think you don't probably need as many IOIs as exist now. I think you can use information technology and policies and procedures to with the IOI, so you don't need as many, and some of the inspection practices should change, where they do, like every other business, you do audit sampling. You don't check every single entry on every single form. That's not how auditing works, in the business world. You take samples and you test, stress test, if you will. So, we are concerned, though, that, and from what I've heard in my conversations with ATF, that the president's proposed budget would be cut so deep to the bone that a lot of these important services that the industry relies upon, that we have to have from ATF in order to operate lawfully, are going to be cut. And it's going to have an impact, like, as I say, on NFA forms, on import permits, on, license renewals and things like that. Stuff that's not very sexy. It's kind of behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Nuts and bolts, operational stuff, but it's important. It matters.
Well, because that ends up having an impact not just on the industry, but on your consumers, right? On your customers as well.
Sure.
And again, it comes back to this idea that it sounds great in theory. Let's obliterate the ATF. Let's get rid of it. Let's close it down. But I think Cody Wisniewski had a piece at the Washington Examiner a couple of weeks ago. I was talking with him about it. And like you, he pointed out, if you dismantle the agency, but the regulations are still in place, you haven't really accomplished anything, right? Those regulations have to be enforced by some entity. And if it's not the ATF, then what is it going to be? And so, again, sure, would love to see, as you say, deep structural reforms to the ATF. But if that means that, again, NFA wait times are going to increase, it becomes more difficult to purchase, a firearm that's produced overseas. I don't think that's what gun owners are looking for. I don't think that's what Second Amendment advocates are hoping for, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. And I think some of what I've heard is it will also have an impact on ATF's law enforcement functions, right? And we don't want that. We want ATF out there and going after violent criminals, trigger pullers, as they say. But to your point, structural reforms, yes. Are we seeing those take place now under the Trump administration and the new leadership? Absolutely. And that's all for the good, and that needs to be made permanent. But doing away with ATF, I read somewhere somebody referred to it as that would be like a Trojan horse. And that's true. The laws don't go away. They have to be enforced. We would rather see that with the ATF we know, understand, and have a relationship with. As you know, we try to work closely with ATF on programs like Don't Lie to the Other Guy and Operation Secure Store. But we need the customer service. We don't want an antagonistic relationship with an entirely new entity that we don't, have any kind of relationship with DEA. And, we've talked to people people may not realize this. I didn't actually know this. DEA regulates pharmacies. They inspect and audit pharmacies for controlled substances. And what I've heard is that the relationship between DEA inspectors and the pharmacies is not good. It's very contentious. It's very, I think maybe hostile might be the right word. So we don't want to see that culture, permeate this merged entity and have that sort of mentality applied to, dealers who are being inspected by ATF every, so many years.
Yeah, we saw enough of that during the Biden administration.
Yes, we did.
All right, so let's move on here to another topic that I know is of great interest both to our audience and to yourself, and that's the Supreme Court's decision not to hear the Snopes case. Coincidentally or not, Larry, a couple of that happened on Monday. Then yesterday we saw the Rhode Island House Judiciary Committee approve a sweeping semi-auto ban that's going to the House floor. Votes expected on Thursday. I think there's still a chance that we can keep this bottled up in committee in the Senate, but ultimately it's going to rely, I think, on what the Senate president does there. Are you concerned not only about the delay of a term or two, in the words of Brett Kavanaugh, to answer this fundamental question about whether or not semi-automatic long guns are protected by the Second Amendment? Are you concerned that this decision to kick this can down the road is going to embolden anti-gun lawmakers and really kind of supercharge this effort to impose semi-auto bans before the Supreme Court has a chance to weigh in?
You're exactly right. We're very disappointed by the decision to deny cert. And, we agree with Justice Thomas's dissent. I don't really understand Justice Kavanaugh's reasoning. I mean, he essentially, he basically acknowledges that the courts below are not following Heller and Bruin, that modern sporting rifles are protected arms under the Second Amendment, and there's no history or tradition to ban commonly owned firearms. So we don't understand the logic or the reason to wait a term or two, because you're exactly right. What we've seen is states get emboldened. We're very concerned about Rhode Island. And right now, based on the law in the First Circuit that incorrectly applies Heller and Bruin, you're not going to be successful in a challenge to a ban in Rhode Island. NSSF funded the Ocean State Tactical Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
The court denied cert on that. That's a little different because it was a preliminary injunction stage, but it makes it difficult to challenge in the First Circuit. Now, yes, there are cases coming to the Supreme Court where cert will certainly be filed. There's the New Jersey case in the Third Circuit. There's the NSSF case and others in the Seventh Circuit. That's on appeal from a trial court order granting a permanent injunction against Illinois' assault weapons ban. So that will head to the, whether we win or the state wins, that's headed to the Supreme Court. So we don't really know why it was a need to wait a term or two. You can speculate and put your tinfoil hat on why, but we're somewhat encouraged by some of the things, just as Kavanaugh said, because remember he dissented in Heller too in the D.C. Court of Appeals when he was on the bench there.
Right.
So I'm optimistic that when the court takes a hardware case, whether it comes from the Third Circuit, the Seventh Circuit, or otherwise, I think the votes are there to hold that it's violation of the Second Amendment. We've been waiting 10 years. The lower courts are not faithfully applying the law. We see, like in Oregon, it's not even an arm, at all. It's not protected at all. It's just an accoutrement. I mean, very frustrating. So we do believe the court will eventually take a case. We would have liked to have seen them take a case now because we don't think there's any reason to wait. We think it's very clear that the lower courts are not faithfully applying the test in Bruin. They're switching the burden to the plaintiff, et cetera. And honestly, we think that's very purposeful by the lower courts. We think they are, knowingly, willfully not complying with test in Bruin, which really, again, Bruin test was not new. That was the test laid out in Heller. They just reinforced, no, this is the test. So Bruin was a new test. It's the Heller test. So it's very frustrating because, we've got now Colorado, we've got, we'll see what happens in Rhode Island. So, the court has had opportunities in the past to take cases on the preliminary injunction phase. They don't like to do that in the preliminary injunction phase,
right?
Or stage. Justice Thomas, concurred in the denial of cert in the Barnett case out of the Seventh Circuit, the NSSF case, along with NRA and others, because it was preliminary injunction stage. But when that case comes back from the Seventh Circuit, it's on appeal now by the state on the merits where we want a permanent injunction.
Mm-hmm.
Justice Thomas said we should take that case when it comes back. So I think the votes are there. We didn't hear anything from Chief Justice Roberts or Associate Justice Amy Coney Barrett.
Yeah.
Why they voted to deny cert. I would have liked to have understood their reasoning, but what we'll see. There's not much we can do, right, except keep pointing cases at the Supreme Court until they take one.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah.
they're waiting for, I've heard the theory, well, they're waiting for a split, and they're likely to get that in the Third Circuit with the New Jersey case. We'll see. They don't need, it's not some sort of constitutional requirement that you have a split in the circuits. It's just kind of often when they take it, but it's not a requirement. And when you
Right.
have clearly flagrant disobeying of the Supreme Court test, they should act. They shouldn't wait because, as Justice Thomas pointed out, and we did in our statement, millions and millions of Americans are being denied their constitutional rights in these states that have enacted bans on protected arms. And that should not be allowed to stand.
Absolutely. All right, I tell you what, let's we've talked about a couple of frustrating topics. Let's end on a happier note here. Citibank.
You want to talk about the
Yankees? No. But Citi yesterday announcing that it is dropping its a policy regarding firearms dealers, right? This best practices that it put in place in 2018 requiring their business customers to put their gun buyers through background checks, which is a non-issue because that's federal law anyway, right? But they also impose, some other requirements, right? If you're selling "quote unquote" large capacity magazines, you could not do business with the city. Basically, enforcing additional gun controls on their customers. Citi now says that policy is going away. They talked about the changing regulatory environment. You don't have to read too far between the lines to know, okay, this is coming as a result of the work that the Trump administration, Republicans in Congress, and Republicans at the state level have been doing over the past couple of years to rein in these types of abuses. How heartened are you to see Citi make this change?
Well, we're really glad, right? And I think it's really a result of a lot of hard work led by NSSF in passing the Firearms Industry Non-Discrimination Act in a number of states. For example, in Texas, where the Attorney General barred Citibank from participating in taxpayer-funded or receiving taxpayer-funded contracts. So municipal bond work they're not eligible for, and that cost Citi tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars being blocked out or kept out of the bond market. And so pressure from the Trump administration, the comments by the president directed at Bank of America, JP Morgan, we are seeing the banks singing a different tune. So we're very heartened by the announcement yesterday. And I will point out that the senior vice president from Citibank that posted the blog is a former deputy mayor of New York City under Mayor Bloomberg. So I'm sure it pained him deeply to write that. But that was a direct result, of policies adopted after Parkland. And as you point out, they say, well, we need best practices. And then say, well, you can't sell to people, under 18 or, things that were already the law. And that industry members already did. So, but it did impact, very, very large, one of the largest retailers in the country, had a banking relationship with Citibank, and it ended as a result of that policy. So now this is a public statement. Let's see what actually happens, because, they can make a public statement, but then still behind closed doors at risk policy committees when they decide whether to make a loan or not make a loan. You can see it, this anti-gun bias and discrimination rear its ugly head. So I want to see people show me they got loans from Citi or banking relationships with Citi after this change in policy. And I will tell you, another bank that changed its policy was Bank of America. After the Texas Find Act and then the Florida Find Act, Bank of America quietly changed their ESG policy and went from a post-Parkland categorical ban on lending to anyone who makes modern sporting rifles and cut off banking relationships with major manufacturers. They changed so it wasn't a categorical no. It would be on a case-by-case basis. But, in talking to some people in that world, they could still do it. It just takes place behind closed doors at these, lending or what I call, risk tolerance meetings, committees. Just, are we willing to take this quote unquote risk? Hopefully, these banks will make objective financial decisions based on objective financial criteria. Can they repay the loan? Are they credit worthy? And that's really what's behind the Fair Access to Banking bill that's pending in the Senate and the House. It's Senator Kramer. There's 43 co-sponsors in the House, and a couple, over 100 in the House. It's Congressman Andy Barr from Kentucky. So we're pushing that. And what that bill basically says is that if you're a big bank and you discriminate against not just members of the buyers, any lawful industry and business for political purposes, that's your choice. You can do that, but you're not entitled to then receive taxpayer-funded resources like the automated clearinghouse, like FDIC insurance, like the Fed Reserve, lending window that are crucial for banks to function, particularly these very large banks. Those resources are majority taxpayer owned. And so, just as a bank can make a decision to discriminate if it wants, well, then, the government has the right to make those choices as well in the marketplace. And you're not going to have those resources if you're discriminating against a constitutional right. So we think that growing support, Senator Hawley just came on the bill a little while ago, is catching their attention. We would love to have Senator Rounds support for the bill. City is actually headquartered in South Dakota, so we've been talking to Senator Rounds about getting him to support the bill. He's the only Republican on the Senate Banking Committee that doesn't support the bill. If he supported the bill, we could get that bill out of the Banking Committee and to the floor of the United States Senate and force a vote on the issue. So if you live in South Dakota, pick up the phone, call Senator Rounds' office and encourage him to support the Fair Access to Banking bill and Senate Bill 401. But, again, very pleased to see this progress and change by city. We want to see more banks like JP Morgan, for example, where Jamie Dimon testified that, we will not lend under any circumstances to companies that make military-style weapons of war using the gun control trope. So, but the pressure, state legislation, the federal legislation, Trump administration, is having an impact. And it's nice to see, frankly, these big behemoth banks that were bailed out by the taxpayer in 2008, I remind you, succumbing to the pressure and backing down from these anti-gun policies that they adopted, all on their own. This was not just Operation. That's an important point to make. Operation choke point of the Obama administration, DOJ, FDIC, the Federal Reserve pressured the banks to cut us off and other industries. That stopped. We got that stopped. Then it became privatized, and they just caved to the ESG pressure from these gun control groups, et cetera.
Right.
So it's nice to see them backing away from that. But we'd still like to see fair access to banking passed, because we don't want to see, the next change in administration and they go back to the same old, same old. We need to make this law.
Exactly right. Larry, we got to leave it there. But as always, thank you so much for joining me on the program. I hope that by the next time we have you on, the Sox are at least single digits behind and maybe even making it competitive. But Larry Keane, thank you as always, sir. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you, Cam. Be well.
Thanks once again to Larry for joining me on the program. It is always good talking with him, and I know we'll be doing it again very soon. Hopefully, as I said, the Red Sox will be in a little bit better shape the next time we welcome onto the program. He and I have been going back and forth about this for decades now, and generally, Larry does get my goat when it comes to the ALE standings. All right, on to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day. And our recidivist report will start there with a case out of Ohio. Maryville police shooting suspect on community control, probation, had a previous felony charge, previous felony conviction, despite the headline from the Columbus Dispatch. Dustin Ohm, charged now with aggravated attempted murder. He's accused of shooting at police officers who were responding to a domestic dispute at his home. And according to court records, well acquainted with the criminal justice system. This was early last Friday. Police responded to his home in Marysville on a report of a domestic dispute. Ohm reportedly fired several shots at officers before fleeing the scene. A chase ensued. That chase ended when a deputy out of Union County shot Ohm on a highway there. An officer who was injured has been released from the hospital, is doing okay. Ohm, meanwhile, remains in the hospital. And as WBNS in Columbus, Ohio reports, at the time of the shooting last Friday, Ohm was serving a 24-month sentence of community control, basically probation, after he pleaded guilty to gun and drug charges, according to the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Now, one of those charges was possessing a weapon under disability. Ohm is a convicted felon. He was convicted of assault, felony assault, as well as several misdemeanors. His criminal history in Franklin County dates back to 2017. So he was not allowed to possess a firearm because of a violent felony. And yet, when he was arrested and charged with, among other crimes, being, again, in Ohio, again, it's weapons under disability, but this is basically felon in possession of a firearm, Ohm did not get sentenced to prison. He got, again, community control. He was basically released and told to abide by the terms of that community control. Problem is, he didn't. According to 10 TV in Columbus, Marysville police responded to Ohm's home at least 8 times since the start of 2024 while he's on probation. The reports range from concerns of domestic violence to suicidal threats, disputes with neighbors. He allegedly violated probation in April, just a couple of months ago, was charged with menacing, but a probation officer gave him another chance, said that he was, quote, complying with counseling. So his probation could have been revoked. He could have been sent to prison, but that didn't happen. Supposedly, again, because Ohm was complying with his counseling requirement. Well, I mean, listen, you can show up for counseling. If you're still being charged with menacing, I'm guessing you're not getting much out of those counseling sessions. So there were, again, opportunities here for the state to intervene, to remove this individual from society because he was failing to comply with the terms of his probation. Probation, frankly, that I don't think he should have received in the first place, given his violent criminal history. One of the charges that he faced was ultimately dropped was a domestic violence charge. At one point, his girlfriend, I don't know if this was the same woman who was involved in this domestic violence complaint last Friday, but at one point, he was charged with basically breaking down a bathroom door in a courthouse because his girlfriend had fled from him, locked herself in the bathroom door because she was afraid of him. She told the judge that she had to lock up knives in the home because she was afraid that he would snap. She expressed, a great deal of concern. She eventually, I shouldn't say eventually, I think it was a couple of weeks later, rescinded those allegations, told the judge, never mind, we're both getting mental health treatment here, and, I just want this legal issue to go away. And the judge basically agreed, ordered Ohm to pay, I think, a $150 fine, and that was essentially it. So multiple opportunities here for the state of Ohio to deal more seriously with Dustin Ohm, and now that he's accused of attempted aggravated murder, I imagine that will happen, but wasted opportunities that led to those charges being filed. Today's Armed Citizen story comes from Arizona. A New York Post with a headline: Arizona dog owner squares off against cougar who fatally attacked him, or who attacked him in his pooch twice, fatally shooting the predator. Oftentimes, I'd say the vast majority of our defensive gun uses that we cover here at Bearing Arms Cam and Company involve predators of the two-legged variety, but every now and then you run across a story like this. This was in Buckeye, Arizona, about 10 p.m. last Sunday. The man walking his dog, and without warning, a cougar ends up pouncing on the pup, according to the Arizona Game and Fish Department. The dog owner tried to get the mountain lion off of his dog, started kicking the cat, successful at first, but officials say the cougar did not give up. As the man and his pet managed to flee the area, the cougar continued to track them, according to wildlife officials. So as they were getting close to home, the mountain lion again attacks. This time the dog owner pulled out a gun and shot the cat. I'm not sure why he didn't do that the first time around, but the Arizona Fish and Game Department says when it got close the second time, the resident shot and killed the lion. According to the New York Post, wildlife officials responded to the scene, hauled the cougar's carcass away. The dog, thankfully, only minor injuries reported. The owner unharmed. And as the Post says, officials did not issue a citation for the killing of the cougar because they considered the shooting to be self-defense. I would think so. Defense of self. Now, again, it's an open question. It shouldn't be, but it's an open question as to whether or not shooting to defend your family pet would be considered a lawful act, right? In that case, it's not defense of self or others, even though we like to think maybe of our pets as fur babies. But I guess the law would consider that to be defense of property. So, again, pretty clear at this point that this individual was threatened and not just his dog. But that is a quirk of self-defense law that comes up on occasion. All right. Finally today, our good deed of the day in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. Some good Samaritans in Lacey, Washington, who came to the aid of their neighbors when a house fire broke out just a couple of days ago. Authorities still don't know why the fire started, but they do know that everybody is safe and sound. Sarah Salem said her neighbors are heroes. She says, I just can't thank them enough because they saved my family and my home, and that's really important because I was afraid I wasn't going to have a home to come to. It was last Thursday. Sarah Salem's 3-year-old granddaughter, her 3 adult children, and her dog, all rescued by first neighbors who got there, obviously, before the firefighters did. And then when Lacey fire crews arrived on scene, they, too, helped to extricate the family. Again, officials don't know why this fire started, but it did begin in a kind of a pile of combustibles, which were stored below the only stairway in and out of this apartment building. So the stairs quickly fill with flames and smoke. The family can't get home or can't get out of their home. Sarah Salem was not at home at the time. She got a call that her apartment was on fire. So, of course, she's scrambling to get there as quickly as she could. By the time she got there, firefighters were able to tell her that everybody was okay. She learned that neighbors used garden hoses to keep the fire from spreading until firefighters arrived. McKenna Cooper is a volunteer firefighter who works at a body shop right next door to this apartment complex, and has said, as soon as I heard that there were people inside, I just couldn't deal with it. I just couldn't sit and watch. So she and her coworkers actually hopped over a barbed wire fence. She said 2 of the guys came and held the barbed wire down as I hopped over the first time, and then I threw my sweatshirt the second time to get back on the other side. And again, able to use those garden hoses to at least keep that fire from spreading. Sarah Salem having an opportunity to talk with those employees of the body shop there. She said, I just thank you guys so much for being there, jumping into action, because I could have lost a lot that day. You guys were absolutely amazing. So in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. McKenna Cooper and her colleagues there at the Lacey Collision Center in Lacey, Washington, we thank you for your very, very good deed. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I do want to thank you, as always, for being a part of the program, and I'm looking forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow. I'm not sure who we'll be talking to, but we will be covering some of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. We'll delve into the details of that Rhode Island bill that we were talking with Larry about, because it is awful, and it is expected to get a House vote on Thursday. So it will be a timely discussion. Regardless, be sure to check out BearingArms.com throughout the day today. Keep me up to date on all the latest Second Amendment news and information. If you like what you see, I would encourage you to become a VIP Gold, or VIP Platinum member. You get exclusive benefits at every level of support, but no matter which one you choose, you will be supporting the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism that we're doing at Bearing Arms. We greatly appreciate that. Have a great rest of your Hump Day Wednesday. We'll see you back here again tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.